First off, I'd like to state that these supernatural experiences were some of the most genuinely terrifying accounts I've ever witnessed. I don't deliberately seek out these types of phenomena, and although I know this may sound cliche, I'm a skeptical individual. I've always believed that accepting anecdotal experiences without evidence can be disastrous for a story's credibility. I mean, it's incredibly easy to fabricate and embellish because it's impossible to prove that an experience, by itself, actually occurred. That being said, I can clearly understand why some will dismiss these experiences as visual hallucinations or an overactive imagination. I don't want to get into the habit of explaining why my stories are valid. I'm not going to waste your time trying to over-explain myself half to death in order to get you to believe this actually happened. Just take it from a skeptic, someone who isn't attached to the paranormal, someone who's consistently dismissive and always writing off these experiences as invalid. This particular experience happened at home. It was a summer morning, and I just ordered a new iPod that I had purchased online for myself. I was so excited about the opportunity to have this iPod because I was dirt broke, poor, and couldn't afford an iPhone, so the iPod was the best option at the time. I skipped out on school that day so I could have it here when it arrived. My parents were at work, and they work long hours, so they wouldn't be home until late evening. We live in the countryside, and our house is surrounded by woods, and there isn't another house between us for miles. The area is still pretty sketchy though, and there have been numerous times where the house had been broken into in the past. So I was waiting all morning for my iPod to arrive, when I finally hear a knock on my door. I thought to myself, oh yes, it's finally here. So I rushed all the way to my front door quick. I opened the door, but didn't see a package, or anybody for that matter. There's a window next to my door, and it's always easy to see who is coming by. Not seeing anyone immediately was strange because, again, we live in the countryside, a cabin in the woods type 2-story home, and I would have been able to see the delivery truck drive by since our driveway is straight and long before you turn out into the main road. I go back into the living room, really confused, but figured it might have been an animal or something. I relaxed on the couch and decided to watch some television. That's when I hear glass shatter coming from the upstairs window in my room. I immediately jump up from the couch and get kind of scared now because I'm now suspecting that someone may be attempting to break in. This terrified me because I'm an 18-year-old scrawny nerdy looking type kid, home alone, and I can be easily overpowered. I was thinking there were multiple people trying to break in, and that glass shattering might have been a diversion to make sure nobody was in the home so the coast would be clear. A second later, I hear the doorknob erratically jiggling and frantically run down the hallway adjacent to the nearest closet was and hide. I had the closet door open just a crack so I could monitor the situation. I prayed to God that these people would give up and just leave, but I knew that wasn't going to happen. I had no phone, no way to escape and make a break for it, and I was counting down the seconds until they would eventually catch me, and God knows what they would do. This is where it gets extremely peculiar. The front door swings open, and I hear strange murmuring noises that didn't sound human, almost as if it sounded like pigs squealing. My heart is skipping faster, because I don't know what to think at this point, but I just tried my best to keep quiet so that whatever was in my house didn't find me. A second after, I then noticed these two semi-transparent figures walk, very tall in height, but snow white, into the living room. In fact, it's hard for me to put this into writing, but the figures looked albino, but as if they were covered in snow and just came out of a blizzard. The best way to describe them was that their appearance looked like White Walkers from the Game of Thrones TV show. Even stranger, they looked as if they were dressed as priests. They were so white it was almost blinding, but still dark enough that you could see them. They scanned the living room, looking around for something, but they just appeared disoriented and confused, like they forgot they were attempting to burglarize the home. The moment felt like forever, and the time felt like it was moving by so slowly. I tried to look around the closet for a brief moment to see if I could find a bat or something to arm myself with, just in case they were heading my way and I had to fight, but it was already too late. My idiotic self must have been looking too long through the cracked open door, because before I knew it, they were standing right outside the closet door. The closet door has no lock, So it was only a matter of time before I would be too weak to continue to hold the door shut. I tried with all my might to keep them from coming in. The figures kept banging on the closet door, and the doorknob kept continuously jiggling. That's when, all of a sudden, everything fell silent. The doorknob stopped jiggling, and I felt the force release itself and the pressure wear off of the door. I opened the closet door slowly, and my parents were home early, and the figures vanished. My parents were worried sick about me. Apparently, my dad received a phone call while at work. The call was very brief. It was a man's voice. The only information the man gave on the phone was that he was a priest and that I needed help because I was in danger. The call was so abrupt that it ended before he could respond. My dad then called my mom so they could rush back home. But how did that man know I was in danger? Who was that man who called? I told him that someone broke into our house and left it at that. I also told him that I heard glass shattering upstairs, so we both walked up, and to my surprise, everything was fine. No glass pieces anywhere, and the window was in one piece. Odd. I know for a fact I heard the glass shatter, and I know I wasn't losing my mind because I was expecting a knock. I was sober, and I wasn't on any drugs or medication. It just all sounded and felt so real. I never ended up telling my parents because, again, I'm a skeptical person, and maybe it was only burglars and not something supernatural or paranormal. What doesn't make sense to me is that I know these people were in my house. I saw with my own eyes who they were for a split second, but looking back at it now, I'm super convinced that what I witnessed was paranormal activity. I know this sounds crazy, but maybe I would have been killed and I was saved by that phone call. Or maybe I should just come to terms with reality and just admit that I was actually hallucinating, though I swear it was no hallucination. Maybe I was so excited about the idea of getting that iPod that it made me go insane for a brief moment and I ended up seeing things. None of this makes sense, and honestly, I wish I was lying. All I know is I'm not going to be ordering iPods online anymore. I'll just drive into town from now on. I don't know if you believe in God. I can't even truly be sure of that question myself. What I am sure of is that there are forces, things, or entities out there that we do not understand. Things that can possibly harm us, or at least terrorize us. Things that I would love to stay the hell away from, and I would advise you to do the same. Some people, such as my little brother, do not quite understand that, and every day I'm worried he will find himself in a situation he cannot escape. The story I'm about to tell you took place between 19 to 25 years ago in what used to be a semi-small town called Austin, Texas. My family, consisting of both my parents, my severely autistic older brother Ben, my baby brother Eric, my older sister Eileen, and myself, had just moved back to South Austin from Bay City, Texas. My parents wanted to be closer to the rest of our family, so they bought an old 3-bedroom, 1-story house in a small neighborhood near South 1st Street. The house itself was ugly and looked like one of those small prisons you would see in some sort of Wild West show, but as for the neighborhood, well, I really enjoyed it. There was a park not too far away called Ditmer, and I believe the huge creek that ran through our neighborhood had the first same name. It was a beautiful place. Everyone had big trees in their yards, and woods surrounded us. I used to love walking around, or just going into the creek and relaxing while no one was around. My whole family liked it as well, especially Eric. I was exactly 7 years older than he was, but he was a fast learner. He was a bit of a free-range child that never seemed to be really afraid of anything. As a baby, he rarely cried. Even when he had a fever so bad, he had to be rushed to the children's hospital. He turned 3 in that house by then, and he was already walking, talking, and peeing outside. He learned to potty train by watching Ben, who used to purposely go to the bathroom outside to anger my grandparents. My parents said he was the quickest one to become potty trained out of all of us. One day, I was watching a new show called Boy Meets World on our TV in the living room when I heard Eric talking to someone in our parents' room. I'd put on Power Rangers in there for him since that was the only place that had another TV, but I could not hear it playing anymore. What I did hear sounded like the occasional whisper, followed by Eric simply talking loudly. When I walked in to investigate, he was just sitting there on my parents' bed, looking into the mirror at the head of it. I asked him, "Who are you talking to?" with a slight giggle in my voice, and he turned and looked at me as if I just caught him sneaking the cat inside. He then grinned from ear to ear and replied, "No one." I then said as sarcastically as I could, "Oh, really? No one, huh? Liars don't get cookies from the cookie jar." He jumped up quickly and yelled, Okay, I was just talking to Chuck." I was relieved because Chuck had been his imaginary friend since we first moved in. In fact, I think it started when my dad let him watch Child's Play, and instead of being terrified of the creepy little monster doll like a normal person, he became obsessed with it like a little weirdo. He would watch that movie every year when it would come on in October, until he turned 14. So I decided to play around with him and say, "No, you weren't. You were talking to someone else." I was expecting him to say something along the lines of who, and I would quickly respond back, "Yourself," and throw a pillow at him, then run away. But instead, he did something that sent shivers down my spine. He tensed up and a look of shock and surprise took hold of his face. Then he looked at the mirror quickly and said, "I didn't tell her, I swear." I did not know how to react. I just stood there, dumbfounded. I then hesitantly asked him, "Who are you really talking to?" He looked up at me as if he was going to cry and said, "Mommy Ego." Then he pointed at the mirror grimly. My body moved almost robotically as I slowly moved to look in the mirror. I saw nothing, so I got closer and started squinting my eyes. Suddenly, I saw it, but it was too late. A pillow smacked me across the back of my head. "Eric!" I yelled as he bolted out the door shouting, "Gotcha." That night after dinner was a different story. Eileen and I were washing dishes when my dad walked in to get a soda out of the fridge. There was just something about that name that bothered me. What kind of 3-year-old would come up with that? The whole thing was just disturbing. Therefore, seeing as my dad was the one person Eric talked the most in our family, I asked him if he had ever heard him say anything about a mommy ego. My dad just looked at me as if it was normal and said, "Oh yeah, I think it's one of his imaginary friends or something." I asked him about her once and all he said was she's a secret or something. That made me feel a little uneasy. I had to know information now. I was still skeptical about the whole thing, and I thought, well, maybe it really is just all in his head, but part of me needed some sort of confirmation that mommy ego was just a figment of a child's overactive imagination. The next day, I asked Eric about her again, a little more sternly while he was watching TV in the living room. He wasn't really fazed by it this time, and mostly kept his eyes glued to the TV. "She's the old lady that stays in the attic," he said vaguely. That caught me a little off guard and confused, so I said, "She lives in our attic?" "No, she doesn't live here. Chuck does. She only comes to visit from time to time, and when she does, she sleeps in the attic," he said. "Wait, Chuck lives here?" I asked. "Yeah, he told me this used to be his house, and Mommy Eagle used to visit him too." Now, I was feeling really scared, but I had to know one more thing. "So if Mommy Eagle doesn't live here, where does she live?" I said. "Chuck said she lives in the woods by the creek near the dead goat's skeleton. Mommy Eagle also told me she sees you sometimes hanging out the creek by the big tree," he said as he looked away from the TV and right at me. A chill went down my spine. To think some creepy old woman was watching me while I was alone. Then it occurred to me, maybe he's messing with me again, and he's been spying on me like some little twerp the whole time. So, I asked him if she was visiting right now, and he looked back to the TV and said, "I don't know, go check the attic in the garage and see." "Come with me then," I replied, in a sort of sarcastic way. "She doesn't like it when I go in there and bother her," he said. "Because she's not real," I found myself shouting. He just shrugged, and that was the end of our conversation. Things got weird after that day. It started as strange little events, but grew into somewhat larger problems. I would come home from school and find all the faucets in the house turned on, or random items in strange places like a pot or pan in the closet, or in the cabinet of the bathroom. Pictures would be crooked, and cupboards and windows would be opened. Sometimes, I would find chairs flipped over, or sitting in the hallway outside Eileen's room and mine. Then I started hearing scratching and knocking noises throughout the house. At night, I would sometimes hear what sounded like laughter or crying. A cookie jar kept falling off the shelf and breaking, and my mom would have to glue it back together, then find it broken again the next day or two. But we were pretty sure it was Eric trying to sneak cookies. At least, until one night, while watching Unsolved Mysteries with my dad and Eileen. It happened while Eric was at a friend's house. The even creepier part was it happened right when someone on the show said they heard a crash. My mom still blamed him though. She seemed to be the only one oblivious to the strange happenings going on in our house. Even my dad knew and was a little worried. About 2 years had passed, and we kind of just gotten used to everything. When something strange happened, it would still creep us out, but no one really got hurt, and it just seemed somewhat normal. We had put one of those large deep freezers in the garage directly under the attic as well, and it was where we kept most of our frozen foods. One day, I decided I was going to get a Hot Pocket. As I grabbed one and shut the freezer, I had an odd feeling I was being watched. Then I remembered Eric telling me about how Mommy Ego stays in the attic. I slowly looked up, but to my relief, all I saw was the opening that led to the crawl space and the usual light that we never turned on or even knew if it worked. I shrugged it off and went to the door leading out. I opened the door and I flipped the lights off, but as I did, my body froze in fear. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw a light coming down from the attic. I gained enough courage to turn my head and see, sure enough, the attic light was on. I didn't know whether I should dart inside and shut the door or check out what was going on. Curiosity ended up beating out fear, and I cautiously approached the freezer to look into the attic. I will never forget that day. As I carefully lurched forward to look up at the light there, looking right back down at me with her chin resting on the right edge of the hole was the head and face of a grinning old woman. Her hair was pulled back and tied up in a bun, and her face had more wrinkles than a shriveled up prune. She had no teeth in her sinister grin, just black gums that seemed to reflect the light. I could not see her nose too well because of the shadow cast upon her face by the light in the background, but what I could see as clear as day, and what I still see in every nightmare I have, is her eyes. Where there should have been white, there was yellow, and instead of a pupil and an iris, she simply had large black dots. Luckily, my bladder was empty because had it not, I would have easily needed to change. I ran out screaming so hard my voice went hoarse. I wish I could say that was the last time I saw that face. I was on edge for 3 weeks after that encounter. I would not go in the garage. I jumped at every noise, and I avoided going to the creek to relax. Those same 3 weeks, not a single strange event happened. Then one day, I decided to visit my friend JC, who lived down the street. We talked about the normal things, but then I decided to ask her if she had seen or heard anything strange in her house. Surprisingly, she did. We talked about what we had in common, and about what one of us experienced, but the other did not. When I brought up the name Mommy Ego, she froze. Her little sister, who was only 2 years older than Eric, had brought up that name before. Apparently, a year ago, she claimed Mommy Ego helped her get a frisbee out of their tree in the front yard. She said she had not heard much after that, but now she was a little bit worried. I went home that night and went straight to my room. I thought about a lot, about what JC told me, but eventually sleep overtook me and I passed out. I woke the next morning to a scream and found that both Eileen's bed and mine were shaking violently. As soon as my mom and dad burst through the door, it stopped. They calmed us down and gave us breakfast. My mom did not believe us, of course, but dad did. Me and my sister talked a lot about it that day as well, but when I saw my little brother, he walked up to me and said, "Mommy Ego is mad at you," then walked away. I felt sick to my stomach. This thing had left us alone for so long, and now it was mad at me? Why? Is it because I disturbed her in the garage? So many questions and worries passed through my head. But had she truly been mad at me, and that was her only retaliation because things went kind of back to normal, that would have been weird. Sure, the occasional strange event, thing, or noise would happen, but it was the same stuff we had gotten used to before. Another year had passed, and my sister and I wanted to have a sleepover with some friends from school. Both my parents said yes, and so it was planned. They all brought their stuff to school, so we could leave straight from there, and since we were all walking distance from each other in our school, we simply walked to my house afterwards and had fun. We watched movies, did makeup, curled our hair, and painted our nails. You know, the teenage stuff girls did. At about 10 p.m. that night, we got a loud knock at the door. We weren't really doing much, just gossiping and playing the board game Sorry. I got up to answer it, and there was Eric standing there, and he looked very upset. Before I could ask him what was wrong, he yelled, "Stop it! I know it was y'all at my window trying to scare me. I heard y'all laughing," then stormed off back across the hall to his room before I could even respond. I didn't think much of it, to be honest. I was too preoccupied with my friends, so I simply shrugged it off and went back to my room. We all had fallen asleep about 2 hours later, but for some reason, no matter how tired I felt, I just could not pass over into the world of my dreams. Then I heard a knocking on my window. Baffled at what it could be, I simply remained in bed in hopes it was just something being blown by the wind. Then it happened again, a little louder this time. Then a realization came to my head. It was probably my stupid little brother trying to get some sort of vengeance on us for something we didn't do. I angrily got up and went to the window, and as I opened the blinds and prepared to tell him to go to bed or Mom and Dad would become involved in his little prank, my heart leaped to my throat and terror took over. Standing in the window was an old woman with her hair in her curlers. She had a toothless grin and yellow eyes, with large black dots for pupils fixed on me. My body worked almost mechanically. I shut the blinds and slowly crawled into bed. I just stared at the window. Then I heard a tap, as if someone was tapping their long fingernails against the glass. I quickly hid under the cover and just listened to the tapping until exhaustion took over me and I slipped into unconsciousness. I do not know when the tapping stopped, but the next morning, I was the last to awaken and no one else seemed to hear anything of the sort. I began to question whether or not I was dreaming, and honestly, when I think back to that day, I sometimes still do. About 1 more year would pass and my dad had received a promotion at his job. Since he was going to be making a lot more money, he decided it was time to move. We did not really notice anything weird about this time because we were so focused on packing and getting ready. Our house was in a new neighborhood and was in its final stages of construction, and we were going to leave as quickly as we could. Well, on the final few days of us being in the house, it started storming really badly. The creeks flooded over, and we had a non-stop tornado watch. We had the moving truck, but we could barely load it up and make trips back and forth due to the bad weather. The last day, the rain let up a little bit, and we had managed to move most of our stuff to the new house. I was so excited for this move to be finally over that I could not fall asleep that night. I was thinking about the new house and how I would soon have my very own room in a place with 2 floors when I heard our front door open and close quickly. I looked at the clock and it read 2:30 a.m. Who the hell was up and about at this time? I got up and went outside to investigate, and as I walked out into the front yard, I saw Eric running down the street. I had no idea what he was doing, so I angrily yelled at him to come back, but he kept running. I was barefoot and a little tired, but I spontaneously chased after him, thinking about how much trouble I'm going to make sure he is in for sneaking out. He turned down a street that was more like a cul-de-sac with a very large oak tree in the center. As I turned down it too, I saw him jump into a space between 2 houses that led to the creek. I remember how flooded it was down there due to the storm, so I broke into a dead sprint. I nearly fell down the slope that led down to the water when I finally caught up to him. But just as I took a breath to yell at him, I realized he was not the only child there. He was standing at the water's edge with 5 other children standing around him in a half circle. They were all in dirty, soaking wet, ragged clothes, and their flesh was as pale as the moon itself. As I got closer, I could see their glossy, clouded eyes fixed on the water. Then just like that, I blinked and they were gone, only to be replaced by 5 tires with a wooden cross set in the center. Eric was crouched down at this point, examining the curious structures. "What are you doing?" I yelled. I don't know," he said, confused. "You don't remember running here?" I shouted again. "No, I swear," he whined back. I believed him. I really did. "Let's go home. We are leaving tomorrow," I told him, and we walked home, not saying a word to each other. Few weeks went by, and we were enjoying our new home. We had not been able to explore the neighborhood much though, mainly because it would rain like every other day. On one particular night, it stormed so badly there was a flash flood warning and our power went out. I lit a candle in my room and read a book, but I figured after about an hour it would be better to just sleep until it was over. I woke the next day to my mom telling me she had some sad news. JC's sister had snuck out during the storm and had been found in the creek. She drowned. Woo! That was a doozy, wasn't it? Anyway, guys, Phantom's here to close you out as usual. Thank you guys so much for being patient as I made this video and put it together for my 3K special. Just kidding, it's not my 3K special, but you know what I mean. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for being patient while I got this video out. If you guys are following me on Twitter, which it's in the description, so if you guys haven't been following me on Twitter, go ahead and do so. I stated that there was going to be a delay to the video until tomorrow, which is today, which is now. So you guys definitely got it. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of these stories. But yeah, there's a twist. The twist is, one of these stories that I read is not real. The other is supposedly real from the author. So let me know in the comments below which one you think was real, or which one was the one that I made up personally and wrote for you guys. I'll make this as somewhat of a mini-series in a way if it gets some traction and everything goes as planned and I feel up to the task. But basically, I'll have at least one story that I written and just have the normal stories, the true stories that you guys are accustomed to listening to. But yeah, I gotta get my ass out of here. Be sure to comment, like, and subscribe as usual. If you're new, especially subscribe and share my videos. And even if you're not new, go ahead and share. But Phantom is out, and he'll see you in the next video before you throw a fart.